It's Amber and Jay. We are back with the Po2 podcast, all about all things charmed.
And today we're going to be doing, for episode 2, a review of the Reboots pilot.
This is the first episode in which we kick things off, and it starts off pretty much with like a ominous beginning. Maggie being freaked out, and she's walking all like along this hallway like she's scared of something. Mel just jumps out and she's just talking to her, and it was just like, I thought it was kind of weird that they did that. I think they were trying to trick the audience.
Yeah, it was a bit of a cold opening. Obviously, the episode is titled Pilot, as most TV show pilots are called. I was a little disappointed that it didn't have a proper title because the original did.
Well, they should have called it something different.
Like Stronger Together or something.
Yeah, that would have been a good idea.
Right off the bat, we are introduced to this new setting, Hilltown. I think it's in Michigan.
Yeah, it's in Michigan.
And we're introduced to two of the main characters. We know that they're sisters. Their mother's killed off right away, almost in the same way as the Secret Circle and the original Charmed. Although we didn't see anyone die, we saw a witch get killed. The original's pilot takes place after their Grams died. So in that sense, the death of a mother or grandmother kicks off the whole storyline. One thing I did like about the pilot was the atmosphere and film quality. It was very much like a miniature movie. It was like...
You mean it was like cinematic?
Yeah, it was very cinematic. I feel like aside from the Secret Circle, they did borrow a lot from the Vampire Diaries with the fog and the crows and...
Well, I think I remember reading one of the initial plots or synopsises or whatever it's called, and they said that the sisters lived in a house in the middle of the woods. I think they were going for very much kind of the scary kind of tone, and I think that's why we got to see a lot of fog and a lot of them walking in wooded areas and things. They were trying to sell that to the audience, that these women lived in this house somewhere near the forest, which we know they don't actually really live near the forest, but there's a lot of wooded scenes around the house.
Because later in the episode, you see Maggie walking in this wooded area. So what I wanted to get out of the way is talk about the colorism that the showrunners were accused of when it came to casting. I remember early 2018 when they were saying that they wanted actresses of color for the roles, and they were saying that the characters are going to be Latina. I was very excited because I'm of Mexican descent, so I wanted to see someone that looked like me in a role like that. But then as it progressed, we saw that they cast, I think, who was the first one cast? It was Melanie, right?
Yeah, I think it was Mel that got cast first.
And then Sarah Jeffrey. So the first one that was cast was Mel, and she's played by Melanie Diaz, and she's Puerto Rican. I was very excited to see that. Then I believe Sarah Jeffrey was next. And at that time, no one really knew her background because looking her up back then, there was an article stating that she was half white, half Mexican. So having thought that, I was very, very excited because, as I said, I am Mexican. So I wanted to see more of her because at that time, I didn't even know who she was. I think her most popular project at the time was Descendants and a show with Jennifer Lopez where she plays her daughter. And then Madeline Mantock was cast next. I don't know if it was in the character description if she was going to be the half sister, but we knew that she was going to be half Black because the actress is half Black. So right away we're like, okay, I guess she can kind of look like their sister, but I didn't really see any resemblance. But that's fine, you know. I'm happy overall with the choices made. Then fast forward.
Are you really? Were you really happy with the choices made?
At the time I was. But as the show aired and as we got into it, we found out more about how the sisters were related to each other. And in spoiler, we find out that Maggie is actually Macy's full sister and Mel is the half sister, which actually is controversial in itself because that means Marisol cheated with Mel's father. That just adds to this whole stereotype that Latina women sleep around or have multiple kids with multiple dads. In fact, I remember an early article that came out before the show that originally all three girls were supposed to have different fathers. So then they made it so Mel and Maggie had the same father and Macy was the half sister. What ended up happening, it came out that Sarah Jeffrey is not Latina at all. I think what happened is there was an interview that Sarah did talking about her background where she actually had to make clear that she was not Latina. And I think around that time, articles started coming out accusing the show of colorism because you have a non Latina playing a Latina character. And then later in season one, we find out that Maggie is actually half Black, like her actress, which changes the dynamic of the sisters completely because we go in thinking one thing and then ultimately it's a whole other thing. Pretty much what happened then is the show decided to dial back on the fact that the characters are supposed to be Latina and focused more on Macy and Maggie being biracial and half Black. I feel like a lot of that potential and a lot of those plans to have this Puerto Rican background, especially with witchcraft, there's the Brujeria and Santeria and the people that Josefina is related to, Taino people.
Mm.
There was a lot of potential to showcase a culture that is very underrepresented, but because of
Mm.
the casting choices, now we're just left with almost whitewashed.
Didn't they do all the spells in the pilot? Weren't all the spells in Latin?
They were, but as the episodes that came after, there were spells in Spanish.
Yeah. I would have
And
liked to see more, like you said, just a different take on the magic.
yeah, that
Because
was their opportunity.
I feel like we've seen like Latin done so many times in all these witchy shows as either Latin or English. They could have had them do some Spanish spells.
I agree with you. There was so much potential to show a different kind of magic, even if they balanced out the Western magic that we're already used to. Like if they really wanted to drive home that this is similar to Witches of East End, OG Charm, The Secret Circle, we all love that. There's a reason why that's popular. But to balance that with this other type of magic from other cultures, I feel like they
Mm.
touched on that here and there, but it never reached its full potential. And partially it's because of the controversy that came from the casting.
Right. I mean, obviously, I can't really add too much to that other than, I do agree with what you said about the whole racial thing and just wanting to see more culture in the show. I
Mhm.
feel like they chose to make it very mainstream American, like relatable for
Yeah,
viewers.
like what I
You
was saying, what we ended up getting was just a little bit whitewashed. Watching the pilot, I could tell they were trying to get into this Latin vibe because even the music, they had this weird Latin sounding music that was playing. You know what I mean? Do you remember?
Actually, I can sort of remember. Was it like, I thought it was more of like a tap sound.
No, it was this ethnic type music. I forget what the instrument's called, but it's these wooden sticks that you hit together.
Oh, okay.
But you know what I'll do is I'll play it right now. So that's the music that I was talking about. I just feel like the way that they were trying to drive home that the show is about these Latina sisters, but that whole thing just sort of dropped as the show went on.
Mm.
So moving on.
Obviously, after we meet Marisol and Mel, she gives them her speech and says they're better together, they're strong, she's so proud of having them. And I just thought that that was a really cute scene, just them being together, even though you could tell that they were acting. But
Right.
I think the actress that plays Marisol actually did a really good job of selling that because she does play the mother figure really well. She's got that about her in the way that she is, the way that she dresses. I don't think that Marisol is that much older than Mel in terms of the actresses.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if she's like 10 years older than Mel.
Yeah,
Because
which
Mel's
I
supposed to be in her early 20s, but I think the actress in real life is in her 30s.
Well, yeah, so the episodes goes on and we get into it. One of the things that I really thought was different was the way that they tried to make the whole episode very mysterious. Like they tried to sell this mystery to the audience in like this ominous, what's going to happen next, twist and turn type thing, which is, I guess that's normal for TV. But I thought it was interesting how they went to the scene where Marisol's doing the spell to unbind their powers, really out of nowhere. Because if you think about it, did she really have that much of a reason to unbind her powers when she did?
There's a lot of issues I had with the writing. There were so many
Mm.
decisions that were made that just did not make sense. It's like everything they did was just to drive the plot. There was no organic reason to do these things. Marisol doing the spell, she had to do it because they need the charmed ones, but she had no actual reason for her to do it right then and there.
She was in the kitchen and one of the Sarkana crows flew past the window. And I guess that was warning her that something was going to come. And then she went up to the attic to do the spell. And it's odd to me because
Mhm.
obviously we know as she's doing the spell, the window blows through and this fog comes up,
Exactly.
this smoke, which is supposedly, I think it's supposed to be Tadius, who is the main demon in this episode.
But it's
But what
not.
I yeah, but what I didn't understand was when they did further along, they did an episode with Charity, and they revealed that Charity was the one that, spoiler alert, got rid of Marisol. It just felt weird to me because where was the smoke in that scene?
And that's what I'm saying. I don't think they knew what they were doing. Or if they did, if they had any idea where that was going in the pilot, I think it must have been changed. What we saw in the pilot versus the flashback where we see Charity kill Marisol, they don't quite match up. And the pilot had so much atmosphere to it. It's signaling to you very hard that it was a demonic attack. There's fog, there's crows. Harry kept saying over and over there was ice at the scene.
Because I remember she starts chanting, she keeps chanting, the birds are going around her, the fog's coming in, and eventually the smoke all recedes and the crows disappear. But in the flashback scene, Marisol doesn't finish chanting and she gets blown out the window. And then she finishes the spell. Maybe Tadius disappeared before Charity appeared. I don't know. Maybe he was too frightened of her, but it doesn't, I mean, they just don't kind of
Tadius
match.
wasn't involved though.
Well, what was the smoke then?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like they
Because we know that Tadius could turn into smoke because when he exploded, when the girls were together, he blew apart and turned into all this fog. So the girls couldn't see what they were doing. So that's why I assume that when the window blows in, that is Tadius.
at the end of the pilot where Tadius dies after they vanquish him, he explicitly said that he didn't kill her. I don't think that he was on his way to kill her. He was there and then happened to run into Charity. I mean, that would have been interesting if they had done that, but nothing they showed suggests that he was involved. It was a red herring. See, and that's another thing. That's one thing that bothers me about Tadius is that he's actually the professor. His human form is the professor that was sexually abusing these female students. He had this rivalry with Marisol. She's trying to get him out. I think she did get him out, but then they were going to put him back. And she was pissed off about that. And then, Mel carried on her fight to keep him out because, she's at the rally and everything. But it's just weird to me that this whole time Professor Thane is actually a demon. Did Marisol know? Did
Well,
she?
she has the power of foresight. So I would have thought she would have known. Obviously, she didn't.
I just find it weird that she has this rivalry with this professor. Like, I understand that sexual abuse is horrible and it's evil, but it's a very human thing. I don't
Mm.
understand how him being a demon plays into that. According to the Book of Shadows, Macy says that he's a high level demon that feeds off the life force of strong women. But that's not the same as sexual
So,
abuse.
yeah, well, I just think it was their way of just incorporating the Me Too
Right.
stuff into the pilot, which we know they were very heavy handed in. Personally, I think that's the only reason that they put that in there is because they wanted to sell the Me Too Time's Up stuff. What a better way to do that than to make the demon a sexual abuser, which makes no sense to me whatsoever either.
It's like what I said earlier. Everything that happens in the pilot, the characters make decisions that just drives the plot. The more you think about it, the more it kind of unravels and falls apart. Because someone killed Marisol. Months later, the girls are trying to they're taking back their lives, they're grieving and moving on. Then they meet Macy. And then because Harry puts them together and tells them they're the charmed ones, then all of a sudden, this professor that has been, at least in Mel and Marisol's lives for a while, has been a demon. And coincidentally, the prime suspect. And then there's this other demon that possesses Maggie's boyfriend. And then there's a demonic dog. It's like there's three demonic figures that show up at this random time. Then they're quickly vanquished and then they're never brought up again.
I kind of feel like Brian getting possessed by the demon. I think the demon dog was associated with Brian. I think that was Brian's dog. Didn't Harry say that when they were at the Book of Shadows? Didn't he said like a demon dog had a demon owner or something?
I think so, but they didn't explain that at all. Like it's very much, oh look, let's put a demonic dog, and that's it. In the original, everything made sense because when Phoebe activated the Charmed Ones and they got their powers, it's revealed that Piper's boyfriend was a warlock that was circling around them for a while, waiting for the right time to strike. And he knew who they were. He infiltrated their lives. There was a reason and purpose behind everything he did. And meanwhile, he was killing these other witches, collecting their powers. And that theme went on throughout the whole show. It never changed. Warlocks kill witches to collect their powers. In this reboot, I think they did imply that becoming the Charmed Ones puts them at risk. But there's a demonic dog, the demon that possessed Brian, and then Thaddeus. And they all show up in these weird random times and they're disposed of just as quickly. And they all just served as red herrings. Because at the end, we still don't know who killed Marisol, but the way that they presented everything is like, this is who killed Marisol. You've had Mel say it, Macy say it, and then that's it. It's all wrapped up and they're back at the house and Macy's moving in. Then we end with the cliffhanger that Harry's not who he says he is. So it's just a weird story. The more you think about it, the more it unravels and just doesn't make sense. I mean, it looks nice though. For a CW pilot, it looked nice, but the acting was really weird. The writing was just all over the place.
Much like the show.
And yeah, just like the show.
I wish that they just had one demon for the whole episode and they formed a story around that rather than going on several different demons just for the sake of having the demons. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that would have been better. But I know they wanted to put more content into the episode to keep people watching. I just didn't think it flowed as well, maybe. And then we had them at the book and they're trying to find a way to get rid of these demons. And Macy brings up baking soda because she's a scientist.
Yeah, they wanted to use Macy to marry the whole science and magic thing. But then she just literally uses baking soda to vanquish the demon, and then it was never used or brought up again. I think they wanted to use it as an alternative to potions. Like, oh, look, we have potions, except it's science. I really was cringing at the part where she rushes into the attic while the other two are arguing, and then she just shows like, I figured it out, use sodium bicarbonate, and then she's all happy with herself.
The bit that I found cringe is when they actually do get into the scene where they do use the baking powder. Before that, Maggie's on the couch and Brian reveals himself to be the demon and he goes, prepare to die or something, and he pounces on her and she kicks him off, and then she says the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard as a reaction to her boyfriend being possessed by this demon. Oh my god, Pilates. Like, are you kidding me? If your boyfriend had just attacked you and been possessed by a demon, you wouldn't be saying that, honey. You would be like, oh my god, what the hell? You would be terrified. So it's not realistic. And I know as a show, it's not realistic anyway. But what I think they did really well about the original series is even though these sisters had these out of this world stuff, they were always sort of grounded in reality, especially in the first few seasons. They really tried to ground it in that real life and the consequences and things.
And not just her saying, oh my God, Pilates, even before she screams out, when it comes to consent, I can change my mind at any time.
Oh my God, she does. I forgot about that.
Like,
Wow.
I understand if the show wanted to be relevant, especially with the whole Me Too movement being at its peak at that time. I understand that's what Mel's for. Mel was very much an SJW, that whole archetype of women's rights, feminism, down with men, it was a little too much, but at the same time, I get it. She's that character. You knew who she was, you expected. I didn't like that all three characters seem to have a little bit of that SJW tone. For Maggie to say that just as her boyfriend is basically about to be physical against her will, I mean, for her to say that and then say, oh my God, Pilates, it's stupid.
I just think it was just their way of going at the viewers with their Me Too, Time's Up propaganda type stuff. That's what I think it was, because I think they were way too much with that. They were too heavy handed with it. They could have done it in a way that wasn't so obvious, with everything being about harassment. The whole episode is just driven at the audience. Mel is going on about consent from the get go, and then the girls are talking about it.
For them to be that conscientious of the Me Too movement, I find it very, very strange that Harry practically abducts and ties up all three sisters to get them
I
together
know.
to tell them that they're the charmed ones. I find it creepy and cringeworthy. I don't get it. I don't get who thought that was a good idea. And then not just once, but twice. We see Mel get abducted, and then it shows all three of them together. But then once again, it happens to Maggie. Maggie gets abducted twice by Harry and then later by her sorority. I don't know if someone on that show has a fetish for it, but I just don't get why they would do that.
Yeah. Well, while we're talking about the chair scene, them being tied up, we should also talk about the fact that Harry displays a different power than he has in the show. When they're sitting down in the chairs, Macy is sitting there and she uses her telekinesis to make a globe fly at Harry. And Harry stops it in the air, just puts his hand out and stops it telekinetically and then just brings it down. They never do that again. Harry never displays that power again.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that Harry does in this episode that is just not the Harry we know later on in the show. So
They did
aside,
kind of do that with Leo as well, though, if you think about that in the original, because there's an episode, I think it's with Envy, he has telekinetic powers in that episode and he uses them to open some drawers.
I think it's super common when you're introducing a character or doing a pilot. There are some things that inevitably get dropped or changed. Even in the original pilot for OG Charmed, you saw Prue have this odd way of making her, when she had her coffee or her drink, she teleported some of the fluid from one cup to another.
Yeah, telematerialization, I think that's what they call it on the wiki or
Right. And
something like
then
that.
we never saw that again. So, real quick, before we get into more of the charmed ones being revealed, I wanted to mention that Harry was not just like the power that was different, but his personality. He was very sassy, eccentric. Also, the fact that he was a professor of women's studies. Was that even ever brought up again?
I don't think it was, to be honest with
Yeah,
you.
yeah, because obviously he's a white lighter. That is his main job. But then this whole time he built himself a life and he was a professor of women's study. I mean, he even told Mel he has this reputation and he did all this work and he was renowned in his field and he was well more than qualified to take over Marisol's job. Was it her job, I think?
Yeah, it was. He did take over from Marisol. That's why
So
Mel didn't like him.
yeah. So I just found it weird that he had this way different personality. And towards the end of the episode, you see where
Who's Cameron?
Cameron is the guy who was antagonizing Mel over Marisol. Like,
Oh yeah, the one that looks like he's in his late 20s.
he's the one that Mel's arguing with, the one arguing against women's rights. But anyway, later in the episode, we see after Tadius drives a icicle through Cameron's chest, Harry comes in to help the girls and they tell him to go heal Cameron. And he like rolls his eyes and reluctantly does it. Like he doesn't want to do that. I just found that really weird.
It's like, oh, do I have to save an innocent? Do I have to
Yeah,
heal him?
exactly. That was just a weird thing for them to show. But back to what you were saying about the attic scene, because you wanted to talk about the charmed ones.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was weird, obviously, that we introduce Harry. He unveils the book to the girls and he explains that they are witches and they're destined to save the world from impending doom. And that's one of the things that is very inconsistent throughout the show, because sometimes they save the world from impending doom, but they don't really clarify. I just would have liked them to say, oh, you're witches and you're destined to save the world, save innocence or whatever. But Harry unveils the book. And should we talk about the book?
Yeah, so what
Or
do you think of the Book of Shadows?
I was impressed with it when I saw it, although one of the things that I will say about it is it's supposed to be this really, really old tome. But if you actually look at it physically, it doesn't actually look that old. It looks like it's been made pretty recently, apart from the metal parts on the actual book and the edges of the pages. The actual cover is new, really.
Right. It's beautiful. It just doesn't look like an old book the way that the original Book of Shadows did. In my opinion, I actually really love the new Book of Shadows. I love it. I love the color. I love the metal work. I don't like that it's not postbound because in the original book, you can take out the pages. If they wanted to add something in, they could. And that was more so because of production. You know, they were constantly adding pages throughout the series. So it made sense for them to be able to do that. But on the reboot, this book was clearly traditionally bound.
But that was the case for the original book in the pilot episode anyway, because they didn't change the binding for the book until much later on.
But that's the point, is that they did it.
Mm.
Whereas in this show, it's a beautiful prop, but the way that it's structured and used, for example, on this show in later episodes, when they do have the book show its pages, it's mostly CGI. And it just seems like when they show a page that they did for that week, it seems like it's it's like they put in the pages right in the middle, but I don't think it's actually part of the book. If that makes sense. It's just weird. The way they constructed it just doesn't lend itself very well to the role it's supposed to have. And then as we find out later on, they get rid of the book completely. So I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But I did love it. I did love the artwork in it. The woman who did the artwork for that book also did artwork for the book prop in Witches of East End. And she did artwork for The Magicians. She's just a very, very talented woman.
And she's a witch in real life as well.
I
Sorry.
think so. I think so.
No, I think she is actually a witch because I've seen things that she said about, she has an altar and things. So I do suspect she is a witch, which is good because I think they actually had one of their writers was actually a practicing witch, but I don't know. It wasn't like a pagan witch. It was kind of more sort of brujeria type stuff. I can't really speak much on that because I don't really know a lot about that. But I think it was good that they did have that. I don't know if they necessarily had him on the pilot though. And then obviously once they introduce the book, we get to see an Easter egg in the book. There's a page on Melinda Warren.
Yeah, I was very excited about that. Last episode, I said they showed Melinda Warren in the trailer. I was wrong. They showed her in a promo teaser for the pilot. And I was really excited about it because it was a connection to the original that I was hoping they would expand on. But beyond those 2 seconds where we see Melinda Warren's portrait and a little biography about her, they never mention her, they never talk about it, and they probably never will at this point.
Yeah, no, they completely overlooked it. I think they were potentially setting the seeds to link it up maybe in some possible way. Because I also know that there was plans at one point to actually have How Soon Is Now, which is the original Charmed theme tune, in the episode, because Brad Silberling, who was the director, actually spoke about it on Twitter. But obviously they dropped that as well. I don't know if they dropped it for monetary reasons or because they wanted to keep them separate. But either way, I think that it was a bad idea that they decided not to, because I think they would have won over a lot more fans had they decided to do it. And I've always thought they could have put that Melinda maybe descended from the first witch who maybe started the virulence. I thought they could do something like that because I think in the Charmed comics, Melinda becomes a witch or someone like that. She becomes a witch because she meets Tituba or Nina or someone.
Nina.
Yeah. I think they could have done something similar. They could have had them related to Nina, or they could have done
Yeah.
something along the
To
lines.
explain that a little more for people who are a little confused, in the original Charms, they did explore Melinda Warren a lot, but when the show ended, there was a comic continuation of it by Zenoscope. They did a season 9 and a season 10. In season 9, they introduced the first witch, who is a woman of color. So, what Amber was talking about is that if they were wanting to be creative, they could have used Nina, aka the first witch, as a good way to bring the two lines together. Maybe there was a common relative or bloodline or something. But either way, even if they didn't want to bring the comics into it, they could have done a lot to make it make sense. I honestly think it's just an Easter egg and nothing more, because reading the biography they have for Melinda references the original charm powers from the original charm. Because, in this show, in the reboot, they changed Maggie's power. Maggie, in the original show, the power was supposed to be premonition. On the reboot, her power initially is telepathy, which is the power to read other people's minds. And then later on, it evolves to empathy, although I think the writers just confuse the two. But later on, she becomes an empath, and then later on, she gets premonitions. But for the purpose of this, sticking to the pilot, Maggie's power is telepathy. In the Melinda Warren bio, it mentions the OG powers, which is premonition. And then later on, when we get to see the family tree in the book, it's very, very hard to see, but at some points you can read the names. There's no Melinda Warren or Hallowells on there. So I do think she was never meant to be an ancestor, maybe just a sister witch that they wrote about in their book.
Mm,
But either way, we'll
yeah.
never know. It would have been nice to see that. In fact, on Twitter around this time, one of the writers tweeted that episode 8 or 9 was supposed to have a Melinda Warren reference or explanation or something, but that never happened. It would have been cool to see like a flashback episode of the Vera ancestors. Maybe they could have been a friend to Melinda Warren. Maybe there could have been some sort of bloodline connection. Because
They could have built this really rich mythology and backstory, and they could have given us something that would have appeased both sides of the coin, because a lot of fans of the original show still do not like the reboot, still don't think it holds a coin to the original. And I'm not saying that, but they still have issues with the fact that the reboot is its own original idea and it's not.
yeah, they really dropped the ball with that one.
Because they could have just done so many more things to kind of give us that rich backstory.
They could have written it in a very meta way. Like there were people who were against the reboot for not the reasons we were concerned. There actually were racists. I saw a lot of racist comments on Twitter when the show was coming out. And a lot of people just
Yeah, I
were
did
not
as
happy.
well.
They were not happy that they were all going to be women of color. They really could have done like a meta way of bringing up Melinda Warren and having one of the characters say, if they were related to her, they could say she started the family line, but as generations come, family trees, they branch out. And the Hallowells is just one branch. The Veras could have been another. And they could have said it in a way that addressed the racist comments they were getting, because the Hallowells, they weren't called the Warrens. They were a branch of that family tree.
Mm.
So yeah, we were used to the Hollowells being the charmed ones, but they could have written that there are several different charmed ones. And as it turns out, that's what they did, but they did it in a weird way where it just doesn't make sense. They mentioned in season 2 there being other charmed ones, but they didn't explain it very well.
I thought we could talk about now. We've got to talk about their powers. We've got to talk about their powers.
Okay, so let's
So,
start with Mel. Let's start with Mel. So in the reboot, we're introduced to the new charm ones. So we have Mel and Maggie, two sisters who later are introduced to Macy, their half sister. So let's start with Mel.
after obviously the girls meet each other, the girls start displaying their abilities. And the scene where Mel actually reveals her power is kind of odd because the scene she's talking to Nico and the guy slips and nearly spills the coffee. So Mel reaches out to grab it and she stops time. And that makes sense because that's what Piper would do in the original series. She would panic and stop whatever it is. So if someone was going to like drop something on the floor or someone was going to create a big mess or get in an accident, she could stop it. But then what happens is she's like, did you see that, the coffee? And then she freezes again for no apparent reason. Why is she freezing for? It's like there's no trigger for it. And that's the
Yeah,
thing about Mel's powers in the pilot episode. There's no trigger for it. Whereas Piper would put her hands out and signal to the audience for him to stop. Mel didn't do that until later on in the final battle with Tadius.
I agree. There was no obvious trigger for her powers. They just sort of happened. There was nothing that suggested she was even controlling it. It just didn't seem like it was happening organically. It felt more like there was someone playing tricks on her or something.
Yeah, because
Um,
Piper's powers came out of her great ability to panic. She would panic at times, and that is why she would freeze. Whereas Mel just seemed to like just do it
yeah,
anyway.
they even made a point to say it that the way Mel controls her powers is when she's calm. She has to be calm for her powers to work. And they even laugh about it, saying that her powers are judging her or whatever, because I guess she's a control freak. Harry says that the type of person who usually has the power to freeze are control freaks. And while Mel is a little bit more of a feistier character, I don't see her as a control freak.
No, I don't see her as a control freak either. I just feel like she's more of a leader. I don't see her as I've got to go and organize the living room and it's got to be perfect. I have this and it's got to be this way or that way. I don't see her like that.
I don't see her as a Piper type.
No. And then obviously Macy, she's angry with Galvin and she displays her telekinesis, which that's fine. I like the fact that Macy reveals her power in a bar and
Mhm.
Prue also in the pilot of the original, she uses her power in a bar. So I kind of like that. But what I didn't like was if Galvin's talking to her about her sisters and she's like, enough, okay? And the glass flies across the room and the glass bottle smashes. But her reaction to that is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Or what is it? I'm clumsy. I'm so
I'm
sorry.
drunk and clumsy. I should go.
Like as if she picked it up and threw it or something. She didn't even touch it.
The thing I have with that scene is that she goes from 1 to 10 within seconds. I know she's trying to play it off like she threw it or whatever. The way she said it made it sound like she slipped or something. But either way, if she's trying to play it off like she threw it with her hand, that's still a really extreme thing to do. And then for the bartenders to not react, bystanders not react. A woman literally threw a glass across the room on the wall, made it shatter. For the way that people reacted to that scene, her reaction, it was just really silly.
If I saw a bottle go flying across the room and hit the wall, I'd be like, oh, but we didn't get any of that. It was like, oh, you know. And then obviously with the next scene, we get to see Maggie reveal her power, which is
To read
telepathy.
thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, read thoughts. I like the fact that they did something different. I didn't like the fact that they changed it later on and said that it was empathy, which didn't make no sense to me because empathy is about emotions and reading people's thoughts aren't emotions.
As season 1 progressed, it really seemed to me that the writers just completely had empathy and telepathy confused. Because there's even a page, the Book of Shadows, about how to control her powers, and it's about empathy. It would have made more sense if they just said that it progressed to both, but they really did use it interchangeably. Even at the end of the pilot, you have Maggie touch Macy's shoulder and instantly know what Macy's feeling. And I know that you can read it the other way, that she's hearing her thoughts, but it was almost instantaneous. There's no way she
Mm.
can hear that kind of backstory in a few seconds. She touched Macy's shoulder and she instantly knew all these years of feeling abandoned and lonely. So, yeah, and even in the pilot, they confused empathy and telepathy.
And then obviously we get to see their powers in full display later on in the episode where they go and take on Thaddeus, who is the episode's main villain or one of the villains.
Mm-hmm.
He reveals himself to Mel, who's alone in the science department. Is that where it is? The lab.
Yeah.
And he reveals his true self. And his form is very similar to the White Walkers from Game of Thrones. He's got that same visual facial appearance, except his body's a bit different. And a lot of people, I remember when that episode aired, a lot of people were like, oh, the demon's a White Walker.
Yeah. I mean, they're clearly trying to capitalize on Game of Thrones, which makes sense. They did change Tadius's design because in the original pilot, he looked completely different. But honestly, I prefer how he looks like now versus that original version.
You can see his original form. If you look at the early trailers for the series, you can see them fighting him. Visually, he looks more like Javna.
From the original,
Yeah.
like an old
Whereas
man.
Yeah, whereas they totally like CG'd him in the pilot, which to be honest, the CG isn't all that great. There's one scene where he pulls Mel towards her and he breathes on her. He breathes his smoke. And I thought that that scene was really, really good. But the other scenes where he's standing up talking, it's so clear that they're fighting a CGI guy. It's so
Yeah,
clear.
the way he moves, it's overly animated like a cartoon character. It's just, he
Yeah.
doesn't move realistically. But on that note, like I said, I did prefer that design that they ended up using, but it just wasn't the best CG. I would have preferred they did a, with makeup and costume like they would have done on Buffy, but I guess that's probably too expensive nowadays. It's just cheaper to do cheap CG.
I've always said, and I've been very vocal about this on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is Geeky Gal Amber. I've always thought that the demons look better on the show when they're done with actual makeup. I think some of the demons just look ridiculous. Like Thaddeus, to be honest with you, he could have been a lot more threatening had he been fully physical. I just think it looks better on camera.
There wasn't that much interaction between him and the sisters. It just really felt like he wasn't part of the scene.
Mm.
He's like on the other side of the room. It was a miss for me. I appreciated that they wanted to make it very ice themed, but it just didn't work.
I like the part where he splits up, he disappears, he turns into a cloud of smoke, and the girls can't find each other. Macy uses her power to draw the girls towards each other, and they link hands, and their hands glow,
Yeah,
and you
that's
can
cool.
see the light boxes on their hands because they're wearing these little lights, which I thought was adorable. It kind of shone through the mist. I actually preferred the way that chanted the spell in the original pilot. And I have seen a clip of that, and I just think it looks better because when they're chanting it, they're doing it over and over again in the pilot that we get to see. They're saying it really, really, really fast over and over and over again. It kind of loses momentum. Whereas when they say it in the pilot, it's like tomatoes. They put so much sort of energy into that. And I really like that better. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah.
Obviously, we didn't get to see that in the episode. So a lot of people don't know about that. But I would have liked to see a little bit more passion in the actresses when they were doing that rather than just saying it out loud as fast as they can. And
Yeah.
then the demon collapses. And instead of going boom, he has a little bit of a dialogue with them. And then he goes boom.
Yeah, honestly, the way that they did that with the chanting and the vanquishing, it was one of the few things that was very reminiscent of the original show where they used the power of three to vanquish Jeremy. I mean, obviously, I think the original did it way better, but at least the reboot tried.
Yeah.
And I did like their hands lighting up and how they like found each other in the fog or the ice or whatever. And
Yeah, it's like the whole them coming together, being stronger together. I'm glad that they did that and they incorporated that because it really did give the analogy that they really had to be together, holding hands to do the spell, to channel the power of three, versus
right,
what they ended up doing towards the end of the series, where the power of three is now some kind of like force that they channel because they've changed that now, which I really don't particularly like, even though I know the girls have become stronger. And we can talk about this in a future video, but I don't like the fact that now the girls are like shooting lightning out their hands like they're X-Men.
right.
I preferred it in the way they did it to begin with, and they just linked hands and did spells like the original, because that's witchy to me. All of this, that's more sci-fi mutant type stuff to me
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. It's very superhero, very CW, DC universe, you know.
So obviously, once the girls vanquish the demon, they have a silly dialogue with Cameron. They're like, "Oh, who would you believe you anyway?" And all this, and who's going to believe the man? Or it came across very sexist in a way. And
Yeah.
it came across like, who would believe a man anyway? You know, it's like they're doing the opposite of what this demon was doing. Because this is a guy who they've saved from a demon who has nearly
Yeah,
killed him.
I get it. I mean, even though he was kind of a jerk to them, especially to Mel, for them to stoop on that level, it just didn't sit well with me. I get why they did it. Mel was having some sort of revenge moment, but for the other two to be okay with it and like
And they weren't even there when he did that. So they may not even necessarily know.
it's like you three are supposed to be like above this, and you're further terrorizing a dude who basically almost died and seeing a demon for the first time and basically saying like, oh well, who's gonna believe a hysterical man? Ah.
And then there's a slow-mo sequence and walking out, which I did like the slow-mo sequence. I kind of felt like that was a little bit of what we would get that from time to time with the original show. They did like to bring the slow-mo scenes of the three of them together, which I like that. And in the background, you can see the protests going on. And then immediately after, Macy moves in. What do you think of
That
that?
I thought it was a little fast. I think they did it because, like I said, it was very cinematic. They wanted to have that full circle moment within the pilot because they're trying to sell a show. In the original series, when Paige was introduced, it took her about half a season to move in. And it was fine because you'd expect something like that to take time. Whereas in the pilot, they wanted to wrap up that initial storyline and make it one cohesive thing. So it's like mother dies, new sister's introduced, they find out they're the charm ones, they work together, vanquish their first demon, Macy moves in.
But
That's
it's too
just,
fast. They
it's
do
too
too
fast.
much in one episode. They didn't give us time to process everything. It's like, oh, you're a witch, your man's dead. By the way, you know, you've got this book of shadows, you're destined to save the world, and all this. And then they crammed it all in one 40 to 50-minute episode. And it's like, hello.
Right.
It's like they could have spaced it out more. They could have even made the pilot episode a 2 hour. And I think it would have actually worked better had it been done in a 2 episode format.
Honestly, I think little things like that, it could have worked if they just waited till episode 2 or 3. I don't think it needed 2 hours, but I do think they introduced too much at once and it just didn't really flow very well. And even then, they set it up very much like a monster of the week because they had Tadius be the main demon of that episode, but he wasn't really present throughout the episode. That's one thing that I don't understand either. After they vanquish the demon that possessed Brian and they're all sleeping together at the house, they show Macy get up because, you know, she's a scientist and she can't sleep until the mystery's solved or whatever. And she goes through the book and then she all of a sudden has this inkling that there's more to this. And as soon as Maggie tells her that Mel is off with the campus at the rally, Macy's like, oh no, like she knows exactly what's happening. And then the next time we see them, she's saying, oh, the demon's name is Tadius. He's an like, how the hell did she know that? How did she go from having an inkling to automatically knowing which demon it was they were up against and the spell to vanquish him? Like, I just don't get that. It was so ridiculous for her to just automatically know. Like, yeah, I know she's smart, but they literally said there were so many demons associated with ice. Even if they knew they were dealing with an ice demon, how did Macy know that Mel was going to be attacked by a demon? There was no reason for her to even know that. But she had this weird inkling. And even then, when she was talking to Maggie, she wasn't even thinking about that. She was just saying that she was looking for like a ornithology angle, like she was looking for a demon related to birds.
It could have made more sense if they had Maggie do it because her powers are mental. And it would have made a little bit more sense if Maggie had been the one to go, oh no, that she had the inkling, but it still wouldn't have explained the rest of what you were saying.
Yeah, they could have done it in a more cohesive way to make sense, and it could have showcased more of their personalities. But it's just everything happens for the sake of plot. There's no real reasoning or drive for it to happen. It's just this happens and this happens and this happens. The more you think about it, the less it makes sense.
Yeah, very true. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the last scene where Harry is in the attic. Mel discovers a spirit board, which, I mean, in terms of visually, the spirit board has got nothing on the original. It just doesn't look as visually interesting as the spirit board they had on the original. And I don't like to compare them because I know they are chalk and cheese, but didn't seem like they spent a lot of money on the spirit board. And it confused me because the next episode, the spirit board looks totally different, but we can talk about that, I guess, another time. But yeah, no, they use the spirit board and they get a message that says, don't trust Harry. Harry can't be trusted. And then the girls say his name and he appears in the attic, all ominous over them, and is like, I'm right here. So it sets up the next episode, but yeah, and that's how it ends. So I guess that's episode 2.
All in all, what would you rate this episode?
I would probably give it like a 7 or 6.8, between a 6.8 and a 7, if we're going out of 10.
I give it like a 4.
Oh, really? I kind of appreciated it, but I do tend to kind of like really campy things. There were elements that I really liked, but no, I'd say a 6.8 is a fair assessment.
Oh, you're way more fair than me.
And why did you give it the rating you gave it?
Because the writing was bad. I mean, visually it was okay, but the writing was horrible. The pacing was horrible. The writing was just shit.
So
Like,
you're not giving Jenny Erman her praise then?
I don't
She
even
was a
know.
renowned writer, wasn't she? Everybody was talking about how exciting it was that she was going to write the pilot.
I just don't get how a pilot like that comes to fruition. I don't understand how someone can write a script and then another person read it and say, oh, that's fine. I just don't get it.
And it has to go through a lot of hands to get to where it goes.
So my
It
my
has,
guess is that, I mean, I'm hoping that originally it was a lot different and that it went through all these other people who put in their own ideas and then we got what we got because of that. Because that's what it feels like. It feels like there was a lot of ideas thrown in, like, okay, let's have a demonic dog, let's have a possessed person, let's have an old man demon. No, wait, let's make him an ice demon. Let's put in the crows and let's put in the fog. Let's make them all hold hands. Let's tie them all up. It just seemed like a lot of different ideas and they were all mixed together. And then what you got was just
but what you got was what you got. And you said that about the last episode about the Book of Shadows. What we got is what we got. And I
that's
think we say that a lot with this show.
that's the theme with this whole series. It's a lot of potential, horrible execution. I'm hoping that season 4 is a lot better, considering that someone who was writing for season 1 is now running the whole thing with 2 other people. I'm hoping the things we did like about season 1 comes back for season 4. So anyone who's listening to this who is working for the show, I hope you don't hate us for ripping apart the pilot, but we say everything because we care.
Yeah, exactly. If we weren't invested in the show, we wouldn't watch it. And if we weren't so passionate about it, we wouldn't have made this podcast.
So I think next one we'll do is probably season 3, and then we can be caught up in time for the season 4 premiere in a few months.
Okay.
I would like for us to do season 4 as it airs, and that'd be something fun to do. Even if they don't end up being the greatest episodes, it'd be a good way to watch it every week with you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okie dokie.
If any of you have any comments or feedback, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, leave us some comments and share the video if you can on socials. Help get the word out.
Have a good week. Have a good life. Subscribe.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.